Good morning, everybody. My name's Kyle Houchens. I'm a Tech and Trainer for McNeel, and this is Getting Started Rhino for Windows. We are going to be building this little floral ring here thing today. And this is kind of a simple model, but there's some cool stuff that we're going to do today in terms of talking about workflow and Shrinkwrap in particular, and how you can leverage Shrinkwrap to make variations and iterations of things. So first off, I'm not a jeweler. I don't do jewelry for a living. So if you do jewelry for a living and you see me doing something here that you're like, that's not how it's done, settle down. It's a demo. I'm not a jeweler. Don't come for me in the comments. These sessions, if you haven't done one of these before, are a little bit different than a lot of software demos that you might have seen. I don't expect you to try and model with me or keep up with me. I would appreciate if you just take notes, ask questions, and then review the video later, which will be on YouTube. Our YouTube page is Rhinoceros 3D, and that's where all of this stuff gets posted. I do certainly welcome questions, comments through the chat. I guess we'll just jump into it. So typically the way that I start any model is just with some kind of sketch. And in this case, I'm going to move it way back here because, this is more of a thumbnail sketch. And actually it's probably generous calling it a thumbnail sketch. It's probably more of a toenail sketch because it looks like I put the marker between my toes and scrubbed the paper with my foot. But this is just kind of a communication with myself about kind of what I want to do. Yes, this session will be good for beginners. We're going to cover a lot of really kind of basic, simple stuff, but we're also going to cover some things that will elevate your beginnerness into intermediateness and possibly even advancedness. So absolutely welcome. And so what I always do is try and start with a sketch. I do it either the day before or the day of, and I bring it into Rhino, and then I get to see it for the first time, that you get to see it for the first time. And so what I try to do is I try to put myself in the same position that you're in when somebody tosses a sketch onto your desk and says, build this, and you've never seen it before, and you have to kind of figure out what you're doing along the way. So I don't practice these. They're not rehearsed. I don't have any layers set up with things that we're going to, pull a Julia Child's trick on you and do 3 clicks and then say, ta-da, it's done. If this goes into the fan, you're going to see it live, and we'll figure out how to get it, put the pieces back together. And I always find that even if I go down a blind alley or something really falls apart on me, there's some learning that can be done when we talk about like what happened and how to get back from there. So in this case, we're going to start with this sketch. And typically what I do is we just run the picture command and we find our image and we drop it into the scene. Just click and drag. You can move it around like any other piece of geometry. You can copy it, rotate it, scale it, do all that kind of stuff. And what we're going to do is, because this is not set up as a 4-view, like an orthographic, it's not necessarily all that great for building off of, right? Because we can't, draw or anything. The nice thing is we do have a section down here. If you zoom in, it's kind of a section. It's a better section if we look at it out here. Let's not get too close to the sketch and see how shabby it is. But the idea here is that we're going to just kind of tuck this up here for reference. If we had an orthographic, if we had a 4-view, we could drop that in there and actually trace right over this sketch. But in this case, because it's not particularly set up well as far as an orthographic view, we're going to use it as reference, and then we'll work off the dimensions. The sketch, TIFF and JPEG and PNG are the best images to use. It won't take a PDF, I believe. So TIFF, JPEG, PNG, I think, are the ones that you want to use for that. So I'm going to do something I don't do very often, which is to pop a pair of calipers out. For demos, at least. I do it obviously in my studio work, but I'm going to just, like I said, I'm not a jeweler, so I don't have a whole catalog of sizes in my head. So let's do a 20 millimeter circle, and we're going to use diameter up here, and we can switch from diameter to radius. If we wanted to use radius, we could go here, but I'm going to use diameter, and we're going to just type 20 and hit enter, and that should give us, if we put a dimension on this, a 20 millimeter circle that we can base all of this stuff off of. So maybe I'll bring this down here and I'll scale it a little bit so we can zoom in and see it. And we get to model some tiny stuff today. So this is going to be the size of our ring, and then I guess we need to figure out what this section is. And my ring is like 7.15, something like that. So let's go smaller, because this is a little daintier version of that. And let's do something. Let's go and make this probably about, let's go 3.25 or something like that. We'll just kind of pick something. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just draw over this section, and the section is drawn badly, so I'm going to interpret kind of what is here. And then I'm going to just grab a 3-point arc, and I'm going to kind of pick that. And then I'm going to grab this and drag it out here so I can see it. And I'm going to explode this curve into pieces. I'm going to mirror this piece so that we get a symmetrical piece. And then I'm going to just edit this curve a little bit. I'm going to move Gumball over here, and I'm going to stick this handle here, and I'm going to scale this out till it snaps. Now, if you're not getting snappy dragging with your Gumball, you want to look for this little bunny tail right here, or go down into the Gumball settings itself, and we're going to switch from smooth dragging to snappy dragging. I believe smooth dragging is the default. Snappy dragging allows Gumball to respect O-snaps. And if you notice over here in my O-snaps, I actually have them disabled, which means if I relocate this Gumball, you see it's not snapping to anything. Because all of these are disabled. They're all enabled, but they're faded out because of this disable checkbox here. If on a PC, if you hold down the Alt key, notice the disable goes away, and that actually allows the snaps to show up again. So this allows me to, with Alt not pressed, I can move around the screen and it's not going snap, 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 which drives me crazy. And I can get over here and get closer to something here, and then I can hold down Alt, the snap turns on, and it clicks to the end, which is kind of what I want it to do. So you'll notice here that this isn't lining up correctly. So let's redraw that based on what we actually want, which is here and here, and then I'm going to snap down to there, and then we'll just delete the old one. And that way we've kind of chipped our way into being able to manage this section. So I'll join these together, and typically with jewelry, I would imagine that we don't want sharp edges. So I'm going to come in here and just throw a couple of fillets on here, and we can play with the size. A 1/2 mil seems to be fairly reasonable, and we'll make sure that's all joined up. And then we need to decide like how big this thing is. And in this case, it's obviously too big because we just copied the section. We didn't use a dimension. So I'm going to just measure from here to here. And it's 17.97, which is too big. So I'm going to just do what I always do, which is to make a little piece of reference geometry. And let's go draw that 3.25. And I'm just going to put a little hockey stick on there so I can see where the end of it is. So now I'm going to use Gumball to get what I want, which is I'm going to just double click the C-plane waffle. I'm going to snap it to the end of that. And then I'm going to relocate my scale handle here by double clicking and dragging. And then I'm going to shift drag and then hold down Alt, and it's going to snap right to the end of that. And you can see that we're at 3.23. And so it's, it could be just that I'm a little off with my dimension, or we can scale this again and get it a little closer. So let's snap from this end, and let's go here, and then we'll just snap it there. And 3.26. That's close enough for me. I'm going to call that good. You may want to be a little bit more precise, but that's fine for me. So let's go to the perspective view and let's just set this up. I'm going to rotate this 90 so that it is in the correct travel. And then we're going to take this. I'm going to set Gumball right at that midpoint. Actually, no, I'll use the move tool. We'll use move instead. right from this midpoint to a quad right there. And then that way I know that this is, the inside of this is going to be 20 millimeters because I'm going to just sweep this around here. And we'll do that with a sweep 1, which lives here. This is a sweep 1 rail. And we're going to pick the rail, and we're going to pick the curve, and then we're going to just run it. And we end up with this section of our model, which is basically what we wanted. So now we have to decide kind of how wide this thing is going to be, and we need a little bit of room in here in order to be able to drop these flowers in here. And so we can try, let's go to the front view and let's just visually, let's figure out kind of like what feels good from a visual point of view. And then we'll measure it and see if we're in crazy town. So we're at 12 millimeters. I'm going to look at a pair of calipers here. 1295, we're almost 13, so go here. And I'm holding that on my finger, and yeah, I'll buy that. 13, we'll go with that. These feel a little fat, so I actually may scale this a little thinner. I feel like that's just a little heavy. Maybe we go a little bit less, like that. And so 1227, let's measure it again. Like I said, any jewelers in the audience are probably screaming at me, that's not the right dimension. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's fine. It's a demo. Settle down. All right, so now we have our basis, right? This is, and we have the section that we started with, and then we made a call visually, which is one of the things that I like about 3D modeling is all of the stuff that you get to do, and you design the thing for real, right? You can lie, cheat, or steal on a sketch. And I feel like even though the way that this section was drawn is pretty wide and flat, if I look at the toenail sketch here, these feel a little bit thinner than this section is being called out as, right? So I run into this all the time where you'll get a sketch from somebody and you can lie, cheat, and steal on a sketch and get away with murder. And then when you put it in 3D, now you have to make the decisions for real, and you have to take a look at this stuff, and you know it actually has to work. And this is part of the process that you have to go through as a designer, modeler, sculptor, whatever, right? You have to be able to interpret this stuff and get the intent of the object as opposed to necessarily what the input is. And so when I was doing a lot of work for Petal, I spent 20 years being a contract modeler for Petal, and I did hundreds of Hot Wheels cars, and I would get sketches from these guys all the time. And the sketches would be really cool, and I'd start laying the thing out in 3D and be like, wow, nothing here is going to work. And so then it was my job to try and capture the intent of the sketch in the model and then go back and forth and try and end up with something that, you know, put myself into the designer's head and say, okay, what is it that they actually wanted as opposed to what they, you know, is on this sketch. And this is definitely a situation like this because this section is, you know, obviously hot garbage compared to what this actual shape is. So I think we are a little bit closer to the intent if I'm looking at this sketch and the feel and the lightness of that. I think the section we've got in here is intentionally accurate, where it's got the intent with the little facet in there and the little rounded edge and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're in good shape. So the next step that we need to do here is we need to figure out how to make this the A flower, and then we need to figure out how to connect them, and then we need to figure out how to get them to go around the ring. So this is where we get to do some interesting stuff. And I'm going to kind of work in a scaleless environment at the moment, and I'm going to look at intention and proportion. And so if we start with just a circle, right, and we say, okay, that is going to be the center of our flower, and this is going to kind of be the proportion of the flower to the leaf, right? So there's a couple of ways that we can do this. We can just build this as sections, overbuild it, and then smash it all together, which is a super efficient way to build that. And I think that's probably not the worst idea. So let's do that, and let's use let's use the stuff that's easiest. And so we're going to just grab this circle that we drew, and we're going to just extrude that out with Gumball. And then these petals are rounded, right? And we could certainly build that out of a NURBS object, and then we could go in and put fillets and all that kind of stuff. It takes too much time, right? So let's do this the easy way, and let's make the petals out of sub D. And I'm going to just do a 1x1 single face, and I'm going to hit the tab key to get a box, and then I'm going to Control-Shift-click the edge, and I'm going to extrude out another edge like that, right? And then I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and we end up with this kind of shape, right? And I'm going to just isolate this so we can just work on this particular shape. Now, the cool thing about this is if I take this and I just extrude it up, I get an open sub D right here, right? And if I hit the tab key, you can see all of a sudden, like, wow, we've got this magical petal shape, right? Now, it's a little too soft. So what we can do is, this opens up the discussion for what I refer to as the rule of three, which is it takes 3 edges to make a transition. And we already know rule of three kind of accidentally, because it's the same way you make corners with a NURBS curve. If we take this and we look at the points, this is rule of three right here. It takes 3 points to make a transition. If you want to make it tighter, you move the points closer together. If you want to make it looser or softer, we move the points farther apart. When we understand this relationship of these 3, then what we can say is this transition goes this direction because these points are oriented like this. Now, what happens if I take this point and I pull it in here? The transition changes, right? It goes inverted. Now, you can see rule of three in effect right here, because these 3 points make up this transition. These 3 points make up this transition. And these 3 points make up this transition. Now, interesting thing. If I take a sub D cube, and I did a whole video on rule of three if you want to get like deeply into this, but I want to just do the highlights on this so that we can move on. So let's take this and take a look at it. And if we replicate this situation right here, we could do that by deleting these faces and deleting these faces. And if we turn the points on, you're going to notice something really similar. Check this out. 1, 2, 3. There's your out point. There's your out point, right? So this is our transition section right here. And if I grab this and I move it up, look what happens to the sub D. That edge tightens up. If I move them apart, that edge softens. So now that we know that, this is what we're trying to avoid, okay? We want to avoid making corners and sub Ds that look like this, okay? We don't want corners that look like that because we only need 3 points to do that. We don't need sub Ds that have millions of faces in them because we only need 3 points in order to be able to turn a corner. So in this, if I turn on the points for this, you'll notice 1, 2, 3. What does this give us the ability to be able to do? It gives us the ability to make this fatter or skinnier. We can make it convex or concave, but we have to pick because we've only got 3 edges in here. If I take this edge and I slide it down, I can tighten up this end, but that end softens. I can tighten up this end, but that end softens. So I have to kind of decide what it is that I want to do. How did I turn on the points? F10 key. Boop. Or you can use the points on over here. Control points on. Okay. So let's add one more little level of detail to this because we need the ability to be able to control the sharpness on both ends of this. So I'm going to click this ring, double click it, and I'm just going to drag another edge in here. And so now if I turn the points on, you'll notice I've got 1, 2, 3. That makes up this edge. 1, 2, 3, that makes up this edge. I don't have the ability to be able to control the center of this because I don't have any center lines in here. That's actually kind of okay because I don't really need that much control. So these 3 points making up this and sharing the points in order to make up the transitions between the two, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. So what we'll do is we're just going to use this to tighten up this edge just a little bit, and we're going to use this to tighten up that edge just a little bit, and then we can mess with the profile and the shape and all that kind of stuff by manipulating these points so that it's a little convex going in that direction. Maybe we pull this in a little bit. I'm holding the shift key to get this to scale like that. And we end up with a really nice, soft little petal here, right? Now, in this direction, where are our points controlling our shape? 1, 2, 3. These 3 points are controlling this shape. These 3 points are controlling this shape over here. Now, are we okay with this shape? I kind of am. If I'm not, then what I need to do is I need to grab and add an edge in here, and I can do it simply by just snapping this kind of to the middle, right? And if I go to box mode, I don't really like how that dropped in, so I think what I'm going to do is instead, I'm going to just draw, and I'm going to snap right to the center, and I'm just using the insert point command, and I'm going to just draw a new edge right through the center of this. This is this tool up here, insert points. Now when I hit tab and go back to sub D, I've got 1, 2, 3. Now this controls this edge. 1, 2, 3. This controls this edge. And so now I've got the ability to do this. I can now control that shape a little finer because now I have 3. And I think I'm going to just give that a little bit more petally-ness. The other thing this allows me to do is I can control the crown in the center of this thing now. So if I grab these 2 points, again, right, 1, 2, 3, which makes up the shape over the top of this thing, if I pull these center points, I can concave or convex this. And I just want to add just the tiniest bit more crown right in the center just to give that a little bit more puffiness. Now, if I needed to sharpen up the edges, I can select this edge. I could add another edge, and look what happens. Now, my groups of 3, 1, 2, 3, this edge now makes up this. So now I can concave or convex that. I don't need 25 edges here. I need 3. And if you limit yourself to 3, you're going to be in a situation where your models are super simple, super easy to understand, and super easy to modify. I know in any way, shape, or form exactly what's going on with this shape. If I need to poke in right here and make this go from convex to concave, boop, I know exactly where those points are that are going to do that. Okay, we start getting really beautiful transitions here, so now we can sculpt this. If I want this to go from convex to concave, that point is what's going to control that. So now I start getting a shape that looks like that. If I want to tighten that shape up a little bit, I just scale these in. And we can start to see that we start to get a little bit more of a flower petal-y kind of shape, right? Or maybe we don't want that. Maybe we want to just leave it simple and convex. Okay, so let's bring everything back, and then we'll say this is going to be our petal. And maybe now that I'm looking at it, maybe this wants to be a little fatter, so I'm going to shift, drag, and scale this. And then we're simply going to transform ArrayPolar. Use the center of this. And let's do like, I don't know, 8 or 9. Let's see what 8 looks like. That looks pretty good. Even numbers tend to look a little weird sometimes, a little too regular, so maybe we try 9. And I'm kind of okay with that. I think that looks okay. Now, we could go into this and say, okay, if we kill history, because right now history is on, so if I grab one of these points on the original one and I pull it, it's going to modify all of them, which is fun. I could do that. So I can start messing with this. I think I'm going to leave it fairly simple. And I'm going to now, actually, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to finish this part first. I have a hotkey set up for isolate. Isolate is the command that if you pick something and run isolate, it'll hide everything except the thing that you picked. How do we get a YouTube link of this tutorial? Is it private? Nope, it's all public. If you go to Rhinoceros 3D on YouTube, it's going to be posted there. It'll be the most recent one that comes up. And there's a whole bunch of others. All of the other ones are there as well. What command button brings the measurements while working on this model? Any of the drafting tools. Linear dimension, radial dimension, angle, other annotations, all of these in here. Sections, leaders, blocks, hatches, all that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the tab key, go back to box mode, and then I'm going to grab these edges right here, and I'm going to just simply pull them out. I'm going to scale them to 0 to flatten it out, and then I'm going to snap it to the center, and then I'm going to do the same thing over here, and I just want to close up the bottom of this thing. And there's a command called fill holes, but sometimes the geometry, the way that the geometry lays down, I don't necessarily love how it patches things. So I'm going to Control Shift drag select these 2 points, and you look up here and you can see that there's 2 points. And I'm going to run the stitch command. And I'm going to just stitch them together. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here. You'll notice that this was a dark line before. See how it's darker? And now it's a lighter line. That's telling you that there's no crease there. And that is kind of what we want. So I'm going to grab all 3 of these now. There's 3 sub-D points. I'm going to stitch again. And I'm going to stitch all those together. And then these, I'm actually going to grab this and stick it there. And then Control Shift drag, stitch that. So now this is closed up. If I turn this on, you can see that this is closed up. And if I go to smooth mode, you can see it's all roundy all the way around. And that's not necessarily what we want. So I'm going to double click this, double click that, double click that, double click that edge. And we're going to run the crease command, and we're going to just crease that. So now you can see it's a bold line. And when I go to box mode, you can see that it's got a sharp edge on the bottom instead of the roundy edge, because this is now creased. I might remove the crease on those 2 points because I don't like that little wing that's happening right there. So I'm going to just remove the crease on that, and let's put crease back on that edge, and let's put a crease back on this edge. That way you can crease a point itself, and if I were to crease just this point, it's going to make this edge sharp, which is what it was before, and I don't want that. I want the edge creased, but not the points. It's a little weird like that. All right, so the last thing we want to do is we want this to have a flat bottom, so I'm going to double click this entire ring down here. And then I'm going to scale it to 0. I'm just going to hit scale to 0, and I'm going to just smash it flat. And that is going to make this flat. Looks like the center of that needs to be flat as well. So let's grab that. And I'm going to set my gumball to this edge, and then I'm going to scale that to 0, which will flatten that out. Okay, now this is all still editable sub-D. I can come in here, and if I wanted to have shape on this, I can certainly add it, right? Because this crease just, kind of manages the transition between this surface and this surface, and it just says it's sharp here instead of soft, which is what this one is. All right, so let's do our array again, transform ArrayPolar. And we're going to use last axis, and we're going to use the same number that's in there, and we're going to just run that. So now we've got the basis of our model, and it's a bunch of stuff all smashed on top of each other. Typically what you would start doing is saying, okay, well, how do I trim this stuff, right? Don't even worry about it. We're not going to trim it. We're going to have all sorts of fun here, and we're not going to trim anything. Shift Control click this. It's a little too tall, so I'm going to just mash it down a little bit. And then I'm going to use the inset command, which is a new one for 8. And I'm going to inset a curve onto this surface, which is going to give me a little bezel. And then I'm going to use push-pull. And I'm going to select this part, and I'm going to just pull this up and just give myself a little tiny bezel there. Okay, and then we're going to fill this just with spheres, and we're going to mash these all together. And this feels like sloppy modeling. When I first started kind of modeling like this, I was like, boy, this feels really hacky, you know? But the cool thing about it is it's super efficient. I'm just tapping Alt as I drag, or you can hold down Alt while you drag. Hold down Alt, drag, hold down Alt, drag. And I'm just going to fill this. And there might be, you know, there's probably a more efficient way to do this, but I am going to just kind of vibe this and set these in a way that feels kind of interesting and a little more random than if I were to place it using like a procedural thing. We can also run the copy command, and we can do things like boop, boop. Let's see, point to copy to. Oh, we got to actually have a point. Come on now. Point to copy from here. Point to copy to. Why are you not giving me a copy with the copy command? Unless it's just stuffing it down here. There it is. It's sticking it to the C-plane. That's where I was going. It was like, I know I'm making copies. Where did you go? All right. And ideally, what I'm going to do at the end of this is, in fact, let's do this here. We'll use a new V8 feature. I'm going to turn on Auto C-plane, Shift Control, click this surface right here, and then that's going to actually stick the C-plane to that surface. And so now when I run copy, I'm going to go from here, and now we can do this, and it's still sticking that to the C-plane. Do live demos, they said. It'll be fun, they said. See, you guys are like, oh my God, he really doesn't practice these. Nope. I get to look dumb in front of people. I don't know what that says about me as a designer, but all right. So I'm going to use the alt drag because I like being able to control that a little bit more specifically than what copy is allowing me to do. And it never fails. I'll do something like this and something will go sideways on me, and then I'll be watching the video later and I'm like, oh my God, all I had to do was derp. There's always somebody screaming in the comments. Shut the thing off, you idiot. So now we've got this, and I'm going to add a little bit of variation to this. I'm going to kill history. Using history purge, and I'm going to purge all. And then I'm going to just use Gumball, and I'm going to add a little bit of kind of random variation to this stuff, and history is still on. Oh, there we go. And so I can do a little, you know, this stuff wouldn't look perfect. If it was real, it's going to have a little bit of variation to it. Maybe we want it to puff a little towards the center, so we'll do something like this. Can you turn off history per layer? No, it's a global thing. You can turn it off for a specific object. So say, for instance, if I had history on these and history on these, when I run history purge, I can select all of these guys and say, just purge it off of this, but leave it alone for this in here. So it's not, I guess if you had it organized by layer, like if I had the petals on a layer and I had the, the center of the flower on a layer, you could do a select object and then purge, but generally speaking, it's on a per object basis. So I'm going to just, and maybe we even add a little bit of size variation here. And this is going to come down to, this is where you're going to just start like using your designer skills to say what's right or what feels right. I tend to do a lot of vibe modeling. I tend to like do a lot of like, that looks all right. People are like, what's the measurement on it? I'm like, I don't care. Does it look cool? All right, so this is our base object, right? And we're going to keep this, and let's make a layer specifically for this base object. And Rhino is taking a little nap while loading the layer palette. There we go. And let's take this, and we're going to call this parts. And I'm going to take this, and I'm going to add this to the parts layer. And I can't stand seeing stuff in colors for some reason, so I'm going to change that back to black. And now we can turn this on or off. And what I want to do is I'm going to make this layer be the shrink-wrapped part. And I might save that for a little bit later, but let's do the next step of this, which is to figure out how to get these laid out into here. And to do that, I'm going to build a little surface between here and here. And so I'm going to grab this, and I'm just going to stretch this up until it goes there. So this is the surface that we're going to work with. And if I isolate these two objects, the thing that I need to figure out is how long is this surface? And I can do that in drafting. In the other annotations, there is a curve length, and I'm going to Control-Shift-Click this edge. And I'm going to drop a leader in the scene just to see what it is. And this is 62.95. So the edge of this curve, if it were laid out flat, would be 62.95. Now that's good information to have, because what I can do now is I can come up here and I can draw a line that's 62.95, and I can just extrude out a little surface. Now, ideally, I also would have measured what this dimension is. So 8.09. Obvious dimensions. So let's do this way. We'll do 8.09. Anybody who's watching my other videos, they're like, I get flamed all the time for not using dimensions because it's a demo and I never have to build it. So we know that this surface is now the same size as this surface when it's unrolled, right? And we could have unrolled the surface or whatever, but this makes this a little bit easier. So now let's grab this guy and let's move this and scale it and start doing our layout. And we're going to just poke this over the edge just a little bit, and then I'm going to copy and I'm going to rotate this, and I'm going to make sure that this overlaps, and then I'm going to copy and Then I'm going to copy again. I'm going to just kind of do a little random pattern in this one. Maybe I poked it a little too far. Let's not go that far. So let's do that. And history is biting me here, so I'm actually going to shut history off. And purge all. So now I can move this stuff individually without it regenning on me. And ideally, you know, I can group this. That'll probably make my life a little easier. And then I'm going to just place this. I'm going to rotate that one a little. Just kind of arrange it in a pleasing kind of Bob Rossian happy little clouds kind of way here. And maybe we play with a little size variation, maybe not. Maybe we just leave it alone. And ideally, we want to have the one at the end here be arranged in a way so that it wraps around and sticks to the other one. So if I'm up high on the edge down here, right, that one is going to need to kind of end up down here a little bit. And so maybe what I'm going to do is, let's see, this guy kind of needs to be down here a little bit farther. Maybe we scale this entire thing up a little bit, like that. And let's see where that gets us. Okay, so now that we've got these things, and they're hovering too far above the surface, so let's put them down where we need them to be. Yeah, so if this is moving too fast, then the YouTube channel, the YouTube is going to be great for you because you'll be able to pause and try stuff and watch. That's why I said earlier, don't try and keep up with me because it's like you'll get frustrated trying to model it and keep up with me. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use a feature called FlowAlongSurface, and we are going to run FlowAlongSurface. And before we do this, we need to know two pieces of information. We need to know what direction these two surfaces are in, and we're going to use that using the dir command. And if we look at this, we can see that if we were to imagine this surface tipped up like this, in fact, we can actually even do that. Let's get auto seaplane off, and let's make this easier to understand. So let's make this in the same orientation, right? And so if I run the dir command, surfaces have what's called UVs. They have a U direction and a V direction because this is round, how do we relate this to XYZ space in the world, right? And so what surfaces have is called UVs, and the red is one direction, the green is another direction, and the gray is another direction. In this case, the normal is the gray, which means this surface thinks that it's pointing in, and I don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to flip it so that the gray is now pointing out. And then the other thing that we want to pay attention to is the red is going up and the green is going to the right. And that's fine. That's all we need to know about this. We want to make sure in this case that it's going the same direction, and it's not. The red is going to the right and the green is going up, and over here the red is going up and the green is going to the right. So we want to match that. So we're gonna swap the UVs, and the red is now up, green is now right, and the gray is now out. And so if we look at both of these, they match, right? So gray out, green right, red up. And we don't even care which one's UV. It doesn't even matter. You just want to make sure that the arrows are lined up in the same direction. Because what that means is when we wrap this thing around, this surface and this surface are in the same space. They're in the same UV space, right? Does that make sense? All right, so let's run flow. And these are the objects that we're going to flow. This is the base surface, and we're going to pick like this corner right up here. And then this is the target surface, and we're going to pick this corner up here because this corner and this corner, if you imagine this was unwrapped, kind of coincide, right? So I'm going to pick that corner up there. And what it's going to do is it's going to take all of these objects, it's going to remap them around the surface. And if we've done things correctly and the world is a kind and just place, we will get flowers wrapping around this surface. And it mapped in the wrong direction, which is odd. So let's undo it. And let's try again. Let's make sure, check our dir. So we are red up, green right. Out. All right, so let's try and pick a different corner. Maybe that's what's messing us up here. So let's do FlowAlongSurface. These are the objects that we're going to flow. And let's pick that corner down there. And let's do this corner down here and see what that gets us. There we go. So if you pick the wrong corner, like if it thinks that we picked this edge up here as opposed to this edge up here, sometimes it can get confused and then it'll swap the U and the V on you. And that can be a bit of a hassle. And it looks like that's what it did to us. So I just had to go back and pick the correct corner. There's an entire video on Flow, by the way, if you want to dive deep into that. And at the end of the video, I'll show you where the YouTube stuff is and I'll point out some of this stuff. So now if we bring everything back, we can just take this surface and hide it. And we get our ring, and we can even have some fun with this and go into rendered mode. I'm going to hide our curves. And let's throw a few materials on this. And then let's grab, and it would have been great if I did the flow on the spheres first, but that's all right. So let's call that good. And you can see that we've got 20 millimeters, right? It's flowed correctly on the inside of this. They're all touching, they're all overlapping, and these are all grouped. So let's ungroup everything. Let's spell ungroup right. Who went to art school? Me. All right. And so we've got this lovely little object here, right? And so now what we can do is we can grab this thing as it sits and we can mesh it. And we're going to mesh it and it comes out with a mesh and we say cell mesh and it gives us this. A nice, perfect copy of what we have. We can, because this mesh is all closed, if we do cell open mesh, it should be none. Nothing should light up. This is all closed mesh. So as it sits, you can throw this to a printer and this will print just fine. Okay? Because these things are individual pieces, that's fine. As long as they're overlapping, as long as they're closed and stuff like that. Now, no matter how much I say that to people, sometimes they freak out and they're like, I don't trust that. I don't like that. I want it to be one unified mesh. Well, that's when Shrinkwrap enters the chat, because we can grab this thing, run Shrinkwrap, and I'm going to do this in shaded mode so we can see it a little easier. Shrinkwrap. And what it's going to do, and I'm not going to fill holes, and I am going to preview it, it's going to make a new mesh where it takes everything here and it unifies it. I'm going to hide the input objects. Amazing, right? Everybody's like, I don't like that. The target edge length is what controls the density and the detail in the mesh. So let's take this and I'm going to cut it in half because 0.4 was the default. And you can see that the details are starting to come together. So let's go half again. More details are starting to come in. Maybe we don't want to draw the mesh wires. And let's see, are we in shaded mode? Yeah. Let's go wireframe. You can see a little better. Yep. And let's go 0.05. The details are going to come in tighter. And I think that's because we've got a material applied to it. Let's change the color of this material to something darker. Yeah, the preview on that seems like it's a little jacked up. All right. So let's go a little tighter, and we should be able to start seeing the details in here. Now, one nice thing that Shrinkwrap does, you can see it not only unifies this into one mesh, and I'll show you. We'll run a clipping plane through this so that you can actually see that the whole thing is solid. But what it also does is it kind of makes nice little smooth transitions in here. And I'm going to go even tighter on this because I think I want these transitions to tighten up just a little more. And so the beautiful thing about this is you get these little teeny fillets on stuff. So you don't need to go running around making little microscopic fillets. And if you've worked in any type of jewelry before, you'll know that doing that is going to make you mental, right? You always end up with these little pink edges that don't join up and all this kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and I don't want to delete the input object, but let's go ahead and run that. And it's going to think for a second. And then it's going to give us this mesh. Now, this is where the fun begins, because now we have made a new piece, right? This is printable. And if I run, just in case you don't believe me, let's run a clipping plane through this. And if we take this way, you can see that it is unified this entire mesh all the way through. So this is all, there's no overlapping junk inside of it. It's cleaned all that stuff up, unified it all. This is a beautiful printable mesh. Everything is touching, overlapping. And then because we controlled the edge length and the smoothing and stuff, we even got these little fillets for free. Okay. Now, the cool thing is this is still our original piece. This is still all unified and touching and all this kind of stuff, which means that if we wanted to do a second variation of this, we wanted to use little hexagons. We wanted to do some sculpting on each one of these. We wanted to do this, that, or the other thing. We do that modification, or maybe we make a copy, make that modification, shrink wrap. Now we've got another model. Go back, modify this again, shrink wrap. Now we've got another model. Modify it again, shrink wrap. Now we've got another model. So we have 4 variations that are fully printable in like 10 minutes instead of having to Boolean all this stuff together, fillet it all together, trim it all together, and then print it and then say, oh, you know what would be great is if this was bigger. I just need that for some reason, right? Well, now you can do that because this is still a live editable object, whereas this is your printed part. And you can do this all day long. So if you wanted to, make the center bigger, make the center smaller, make the balls bigger, make them smaller, make the petals more or less, bend, sculpt, whatever, right? It gives you the ability to say, you're going to print this, and you're going to show the client the wax, and they're going to look at it and go, I don't like how much space there is between here. I would really like a few of these to be bigger and a few of them to be smaller. I don't like how they're all the same size. And you just go, okay, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to just make this one bigger. You shrink wrap it again, or you change the overlap so it's not so uniform. Shrink wrap it again, print a new wax, costs almost nothing. Let them try it on, take a peek at it. They get to feel like they're the designer, right? Which is super fun. Being a designer is super fun. Doing the work is not so fun, but being a designer is super fun. You get to wear black clothes and complain about things. So it gives your client this feeling of empowerment where they can go in and they can actually feel like that they have had some input. It has zero impact on you whatsoever because you just go back, move stuff around, shrink wrap it again, send it to the printer, and you're done. Okay. So let's take one more step on this. And so let's see, if you leave history on making changes, they don't update in the shrink wrap version. This is an autonomous object. Once you unify this into this, these no longer know anything about each other. So there is no history between the two. So you would want to make a variation, shrink wrap, make a variation, shrink wrap, make a variation, shrink wrap, and then you could have 4 or 5 different variations of this, which is also another benefit to your client because you can say, here's 4 options. You make one that you hate, you make one that you know that they're going to hate, and you have 2 to choose from. That way you can narrow it down. That's client psychology 101. All right, let's do, so this thing we now take and we just say, file export selected. We throw it out as an OBJ, an STL, FBX, VRML, whatever your printer takes. 3MF, if you're using Bamboo stuff, 3MF goes right in Bamboo. And then, so that's done. And now we can come in here and start looking at some visualization stuff. And so we can come in here and say, well, let's change the metal of this to silver and say it looks like that. We can do another version of this in gold, see what that looks like. Just make a new material. And then we can even make maybe a third variation that's silver, but maybe the little deedles in the center of this thing are golden. Because I am kind of a random planner, I didn't think of this. I didn't set myself up for success for this, but let's just go and select these guys. And we'll add I'm going to have to deselect some stuff, but that'll get me most of the way there. Ideally, I would have set this stuff up on a layer and I would have managed this in a way that, the petals were on one layer and the centerpieces were on another layer and then this was on another layer. And that requires a level of planning and forethought that I rarely put into my work. Like I said, I tend to kind of vibe check stuff as I go and then figure out how to organize it later. It's not the most efficient process, but it's the only process I know. So, all right, so let's add that to that. And maybe we even want to do a third variation that looks like that. Let's hide our image. Let's hide all our working stuff. Hide the curves. Don't need that anymore. And then maybe we go into our camera. We change this to have a little bit more perspective for a little drama. And then let's go into our environment and let's play with a couple of environments. I'm going to load 2. I like the Automotive Studio, and just for giggles, we'll load the Jewelry Studio and see which one we like better. There is a Jewelry Studio here as well. So right now it's set up in Studio, which gives you these kind of interesting reflections and stuff. Let's see what the Automotive Studio looks like. I tend to kind of like that one. Losing a little definition on the parts, so maybe that's not the best one. So let's check the Jewelry Studio and see how that looks. I kind of like the original one best. It's giving a little better contrast and a little better read. So let's do that. And then if we want to draw the client's eye to something specific, we can turn on focal blur. We can pick this one. And then let's go to ray traced and generate a render. And we can very clearly make our pick known by how we do the focal blur. If I change this to here, it's going to blur this one. That one, we can maybe crank the aperture down a little bit, or maybe up actually. Let's do 124. That way it's not quite as violent as far as the focal blur is concerned. And maybe we push this forward just a hair. Maybe these two are the ones that we want to focus on. And we want this one to be a variation that we can have a conversation about, but we don't necessarily want that one to be the first one that they look at. And so we can let that run. Down here is your counter. In the effects panel here, I've got a denoiser set up so that it actually has cleaned up this image really pretty quickly. So I could stop this ray trace anytime and actually be done with it in 25 seconds instead of waiting for it to go all the way to the end. In this case, I'll just probably wait for it to go all the way to the end because it's fine. And then it gives me an image I can use later for the video. So I'll let that run. Any questions while that is running? Let me get our YouTube up, which is here. So Rhinoceros 3D on YouTube. This is the main page. All of this stuff is going to be down in here. So these are all the playlists. These are all the ones that we've done recently. This getting started for Windows, this joystick was the last one we did. There's all sorts of stuff in here. There's some on rendering. There's some on Windows. There's some for Mac. There's some specifically that focus on sub-D. There's a ton of Grasshopper stuff in here if you're interested in that. We've got some essential mathematics stuff if you want to go really deep down the nerd hole. And then some stuff that focuses on digital manufacturing, Cloud Zoo licensing, all that kind of stuff. So this is the channel. It's growing quite a bit. There is a lot of videos in here, 354 videos. So there you go. For the next year, you can watch a video a day. And that's where all this stuff lives. Okay. So let's see how our rendering's doing. So we're done. 47 seconds, start to finish. This is ready to go. So what I would do now is just go up here to this camera icon, and I would capture this viewport to a file, which is the left click. It's going to bring up the preview. And number of passes matches, 1,000, scale is 1. You can scale this up to scale 2, and it will double the size of this image, but it's going to re-render. So when you do that and say okay, and it sits, don't panic. It's actually just re-rendering it at the higher resolution. So because this matches, because we're doing scale 1 and 1,000 passes, it's just going to go quick. We'll save this to the desktop. And say okay. Questions. Do you recommend learning from the older videos of the previous versions of Rhino if you have Rhino 8 now? Yes, because all of the stuff that you see over in here, this is all very familiar. The things that you won't have in 7 versus 8 is Shrinkwrap. You won't have Shrinkwrap in 8. You will have, let's see, sub-D came out in 8 as well. Yeah, so you won't have sub-D and you won't have Shrinkwrap. Is there a YouTube video that explains buttons in Rhino? There is some very basic stuff in here. Actually, if you go to our Learn page, this is a really good resource that everybody overlooks. Windows Interface Basics right here. Windows navigation, object types, selecting objects, modeling strategies. There's a Mac Interface Basics. These are actually getting much closer together. The Mac and the PC are getting much closer together. But the level 1 manual, this is really, really good information here if you're just getting started. This will take you through a very comprehensive getting started thing with Rhino, right? It's broken up into chapters, very basic stuff like what is Rhino? What is it? How does it work? What does it do? Okay, basics of the interface, basics of the modeling helpers, and then there's some exercises in here. The rubber duck, the model that's launched a million careers, including mine. Okay, this is also inside Rhino itself. So if we go to Rhino and we go to Help, Learn Rhino, Tutorials and Samples, Level 1, Level 2, all the sample models, the user guide, all of the models that you would use for the exercises are all in here. Okay? Fabulous. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for coming. All right, any other questions? Do you use keyboard commands or do you get it all with a visual interface and shortcuts? I use a lot of hotkeys. If we go to, nope, not that. If we go to this, aliases, these are all my hotkeys. So I'll pause on that if you want to screenshot it. And then I'll roll down to the bottom, pause on that. So if you want to screenshot it. I also make a lot of use of the middle mouse button. And there's a video on our YouTube on how to use the middle mouse, on how to program the middle mouse button. It's called the pop-up. How to customize the pop-up menu. I'll stick that in the chat. That'll also get you to the page. And so a quickie on that, if you want to customize this, grab it and shake it. When it docks like that, now you can add stuff to it. And if you hold down the Control key and copy, don't do Shift, because if you move edit, you don't want to do that. You want to hold down Control, copy link, just drag something into there. So if we say, grab any of these tools, like let's say this one we want to add, we're just going to hold down Control, drag it, now it's here. Okay? And then when you're done, close it, and then when you middle mouse button again, it'll be there. Any other questions? If not, looks like, look at that, hour and 9 minutes. Is there a way to find out why sometimes Rhino round, sometimes edges over the limits of an object's got a cube like Magic Cube? Filleting in Rhino is a contentious subject, and there's some reasons why it is the way it is. In version 9, by the way, if you are not using Rhino 9 yet, there is the Serengeti build right here is the version 9 work in progress. There's a bunch of filleting improvements in version 9. So if filleting makes you crazy, try the whip. See if it makes it better. We use a surfacing kernel. We don't use a solids kernel. So if you're used to filleting in something like SolidWorks or plasticity or something like that, the ACES kernel has a much different filleting algorithm than we do, and we can argue back and forth about which one's better. People complain about ours a lot, but there's a lot of power that they're missing because they're expecting it to work like an ACES kernel filleting thing. So, be curious to see a grasshopper flow for the same video that assigns random values. Yes, and you would be smarter than I am because you would be able to do it. I'm not a grasshopper guy. I came up way before that started, and I have not learned grasshopper myself. So Brian James does some Grasshopper videos. If you're on tech support and you need to talk to somebody about Grasshopper, Jaffe Walton, Japhy Walton, and Steve Fuchs are our two techs who are very Grasshopper savvy. Brian James also is very Grasshopper savvy. I am not. I can help you with a lot of stuff, but Grasshopper's not one of them. All right. Do we get an email about today's session and links to follow? Not sure. You might. I've never seen the back end of that, so I didn't. I'm plugged into a back end that was set up years ago, so I'm not sure what the actual follow up is on that. If not, Rhinoceros 3D on YouTube. I will get you a link to this. This is our homepage. And we'll go to the home here. Here's a link to our YouTube, just so you've got it. Okay. Any other questions? Anything that was confusing that you want to see another crack at? We can certainly riff a little bit here. If not, I will let you go. 12 minutes over. We'll try to get them done in an hour, but here we are. Alrighty. If there's no other questions, I'll let you go. My name is Kyle Houchens, Tech and Trainer for McNeel. This was Getting Started in Rhino for Windows. Go make great stuff. Thanks. Bye.